So awkward as a neighbor just like saw me looking at him while I'm like sitting here talking to my phone. I'm gonna wait. Hi guys, I'm Kristen. Welcome and welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be sharing my statistics and my favorites list from the second quarter of the year. So all of the books that I read in April, May, and June. Trying a little bit of a new setup today, so I'm not sure if I will like it or if it'll stay this way. We'll see how it goes. I'm going to start off with the statistics for the month. So during the months of April, May, and June, I read 30 books. So 30 books is a little bit down from the first quarter of the year, but I'm absolutely okay with that. I'm not trying to reach for any particular number. Just a reminder for everyone that I do not work full time. Please do not compare your reading to my reading. I'm actually a very slow reader. I just have a lot of time. So one of the statistics that I always like to include is where I'm doing my reading. I primarily read using library and Scribd. So during the second quarter of the year, I read 19 books using the library app Overdrive, which was 63% of what I read. I read only 6 books on Scribd, which is 20% of what I read. I bought 2 books. Both of these were ebooks using Kobo. So I have sort of like a theoretical limit of 1 ebook a month that I purchase. So I'm actually down for the second quarter, but I think I was up 1 for the beginning of the year. So I think I'm sort of like on track for no more than 1 a month. And then I always include sort of an other category, which is if I already owned one, if I was borrowing it from a friend or anything else like that. And there was 4 books that were in the other category. For the genre breakdown, I read 12 adult fantasy, 7 young adult fantasy, 1 sci-fi, and 10 romance. I think this is actually proportionally up from the first quarter of the year for romance, and breakdown in terms of what kinds of romance: 3 fantasy romance, 6 contemporary romance, and 1 historical romance. And then out of all 30 books, only 2 were written by male authors and all the rest were written by female authors. I don't do this intentionally, it's just apparently what I read. And finally, I wanted to include some statistics on the series that I've been reading, so how much I'm starting versus finishing series. So I started 8 series and I finished 3. I'm pretty sure 2 of those 3 were ones that I also started. So it's not necessarily equal, but it is what it is. Okay, now getting into the top favorite books that I read during the second quarter of the year. I'll start with a couple honorable mentions, ones that I think just didn't quite make the cut, but that I really, really enjoyed overall. The first of which is The Counselor by E.J. Beaton. I read this during this past month as part of the Olympics readathon, and I also was able to convince my fantasy book club here in my city to read this as our book club pick for the month of June. I know a lot of the talk about this was that it was very Machiavellian, and it is a little bit, but it's not like she craves power, although I think she, the main character, would actually say that, but that's not what comes through. It's more that she is someone who is extremely knowledgeable, capable with really great moral values, and the idea of what makes a good leader or who should be in charge is very much so at play in this book, because Lysande is literally in the process of selecting the next ruler for their empire. I won't get into too much details on The Counselor now, but you can definitely check out my wrap up for the month of June. I'll talk a little bit more in depth about it there, but I did think this was a really interesting book. It was very episodic in quality with very long chapters. There's only 15 chapters in the entire book. It was a very slow, incremental build in the intensity of what was happening, but also my interest throughout. So with every single new chapter, not only were things getting more and more interesting and exciting and building in the feel and the vibe of the intensity of what was happening, but so too did my interest grow more and more with each chapter. Another honorable mention would be Beach Read by Emily Henry. I have to include this. It didn't quite make the cut for the top favorites. There were some that I enjoyed the book a little bit more than with Beach Read, but for how much I have talked about this book and the author Emily Henry, I had to include it here. This is a contemporary romance book, but it is a little bit of a darker romance, not necessarily in that the relationship is dark, but more that it deals with really, really human, personal things going on in both the lives of the main character and the love interest. Emily Henry's romance books, I'm finding, are very much so trying to focus on the realities of romance and relationships. So not putting everything through this perfect happily ever after rose-colored glasses filter. And then the final honorable mention has to be Six of Crows. You know, not one of my favorite books of all time, but I totally get the hype now. It was just such a fun read. I am a really big character reader, so of course I really loved this character-driven young adult heist thing. I thought the mix between the backstories and what was currently happening was really great. I'm not going to get into details, obviously. You've probably heard of Six of Crows, but I did really enjoy this, and definitely an honorable mention for this quarter. Okay, now to get into my top 5 favorites from the second quarter. Same with last time I did the first quarter wrap up, I'm going to include my number 1 favorite, but then all of the rest are in no particular order because I'm just really bad at ranking things, and you just can't make me. I won't do it. But I'm gonna switch it up and leave the favorite one for last this time. So in no particular order, one of my favorites from this quarter was The Winter of the Witch by Catherine Arden. This is the final installment in the Winter Night trilogy. This is a young adult historical fantasy set in Russia, featuring a main character who can both see and communicate with the house and forest spirits, who are starting to lose power because of the increase or the rise in the faith of Christianity at this time. I thought that this third book was sort of the perfect conclusion to this series. I didn't love everything that happened, but I was really satisfied with how things wound up. I really appreciated the change and the growth or development in the character relationships between some of the characters involved. In particular, I thought that Vasia's journey or in character arc and growth over the course of the trilogy was absolutely perfect. And I liked her more and more as each book went on. The other young adult fantasy on this is Flamefall by Rosaria Munda. This is the second book in the Aurelian cycle, which is a young adult political dragon fantasy series. This book and this series is just getting me. I think it is a young adult fantasy that is going to work for a lot of adults as well, even adults who don't typically read young adult fantasy. This series not only has dragon animal companions and really complicated character dynamics and relationships, but it also has really interesting political writing in that it is showing the inner workings and the complicated decision-making process of a government, and particularly a post-revolutionary government that is trying to be better than what came before it, but that also has some flaws. And in this one, we see the flaws heightened. There were still complicated dynamics between Annie and Lee. They had some stuff figured out, but there was new tension, external pressures on their relationship. But you still always have the sense that Annie and Lee are each other's person, and whether that's for a healthy or good reason, it just is the way that it is. I am fairly confident that I'm going to be very satisfied with the third book, even if it, and I think that it absolutely will, completely destroys me. I have one romance in the top 5 favorites, and that is The Kiss Quotient by Helen Huang. I was completely blown away by the emotional journey and the emotional impact that this book had. I was expecting it to be really spicy. It is. And I was expecting it to be a really cute romance. It was. But I was not expecting the emotional journey that I went on with Stella in this book. This is a own voices romance about a woman who is on the autism spectrum who wants to have more experiences in sexual intercourse in order to get better at it, because in case she wants to pursue a relationship in the future. So she thinks she needs to practice. So she hires a male escort to teach her. Her inability to see herself and the positives that she had, her inability to see herself as someone attractive or desirable, but also her desire to have more physical touch and connection. The way that it was written was so beautiful and touching. Okay, 2 left, getting close to that favorite for the quarter. The second last of which is Ship of Magic by Robin Hobb. So this is an adult fantasy book, the first book in the Live Ship Traders series. I was really nervous to read this book because the Farseer trilogy, one of the other series within this realm and by Robin Hobb, absolutely destroyed me. emotionally when I read it quite a few years ago, but I would like to get back into the realm of the Elderling, so I started with Ship of Magic this time, and I was not disappointed. Yes, it is sad. Is sad the right word? Nothing happens the way you want it to happen for a Robin Hobb character. Things in these characters' lives really suck sometimes. And you absolutely feel for these characters because Robin Hobb is just a genius at writing characters. They are very, very flawed, real people, and they feel like very real people. They know each other, they're all talking shit about each other at times, and you can see that when they're talking shit about each other, they're right. They do have those flaws, but you still want things to work out so desperately for them, and they just don't. They just don't, because it's a Robin Hobb book. And I just love, and I'm sure I'm going to hate in the future with this series, how Robin Hobb can just pull on your heartstrings and build you up and tear you down, if that makes sense. And then finally, the last book, the number one favorite from this quarter. I think no surprises here from how much I have been talking about this book lately, and that is The Mask of Mirrors by M.A. Carrick, which of course is a writing duo between Marie Brennan and Alec Helms. Yes, Helms. It is a ballroom, high society con artist scheme, adult fantasy, but it did have a really, really good mix of that high society ballroom white gloves sort of vibe mixed with seeing more of the slums, seeing the gangs on the streets, and really, really showing the class disparity, the privilege and discrimination that's happening within this city and in this world. This story does take place in a colonized city-state, and we do spend a significant amount of time and thematically looking at this colonial dynamic between the colonializing peoples and the native peoples in this city. But also, the character dynamics and relationships in this book were amazing. The way that the relationships subtly changed and slowly changed throughout the book. This is a book that takes place over a large span of time, which is something that I really enjoy and appreciate. I hate when things are shoved into a really tight, fast timeline because relationships don't happen in that timeline. This is spread out. There is time and room for these relationships to grow. And no, I do not mean romantic relationships. It felt like there was maybe small hints of a romance, not the focus at all. I just mean like the relationships between people. I haven't even gotten into it, but there is also sort of a subplot where there is a masked, mysterious vigilante. It is the start of a new series called Rook and Rose, but I think this is going to be a very approachable series to get into because this first book does have a complete arc. I've also seen that the authors have said that about the second book, that there is a complete separate arc and storyline for each installment in this upcoming series. But there are still dangling threads and small little storylines that aren't completely wrapped up with each at the end of every story. So at the end of this book, it had a very satisfying, climactic, dramatic conclusion, but there are still some things going on that I know are going to get picked up. Some mysteries, some reveals that are going to play into the next book that I'm just as excited for. This book made me so excited just to have read it. I will be getting to a reread quite soon, and the second book is coming out at the beginning of December later this year. Not only is this my favorite book of the quarter, but it absolutely is the favorite book that I've read so far this year. It's gotta be. I've talked about it so much. I think about it all the time, and I'm probably gonna buy a physical copy, not gonna lie. Anyway, that is it for my second quarter wrap up. Thank you guys so much for joining. Let me know down below what was one of your favorite books from this quarter of the year. I am really, really close to 200 subscribers, so if you liked what you saw here or you like what I do, you've seen some of my other videos, I would really appreciate a like and subscribe if you'd like to. Anyway, that is it for me today. I will hopefully see you guys next time. Have a great day, everyone. Bye.